can be a litigious business, James, as this week's reporting shows. First up, a federal district court judge in North Dakota has struck down the Federal Reserve's rule capping debit card interchange.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, he stayed the decision. In other words, he put it on hold until the Fed has an opportunity to appeal. But this is pretty significant. Um, and it does not prevent the Fed from moving forward with a proposal to lower the cap to 14.4 cents plus 4 basis points, and a penny point three to cover fraud prevention costs. In fact, the judge sort of said, the Fed should go ahead with that because the cap needs to be a lot lower.
Hmm.
But that proposal has been pending for about 2 years. In a detailed 44-page, colorfully, one of the most colorfully written court decisions I've read in a long time.
Yeah.
Judge Daniel M. Tainer for U.S. District Court for the District of North Dakota said the Fed improperly interpreted the Durbin Amendment, and it should have been much lower, the cap, siding with Corner Post, a truck stop and convenience store that sued the Fed back in 2018. The only costs that should have been included in the Fed's calculations were transaction authorization, clearing, and settlement fees, the judge ruled. Instead, he said the Fed improperly included costs like network fees, transaction monitoring costs, and fraud losses when determining the base fee.
Hmm.
Not surprisingly, merchant groups cheered the ruling, and banking organizations panned it. Um, I think this is going to play out for a while, but I'll tell you what, given the way the current administration feels about regulation and so forth, I could see this just sort of like dropping by the wayside.
Hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting because yeah, you never know. It could go. I could see it going either way for different reasons.
Oh
Because
yeah, exactly.
it's all about how it's going to be positioned or presented. It's like if it's going to be presented as like pro business, pro small business owners, et cetera, then I could see it going through and saying, oh yeah, we need to take action on this and lower the cap, et cetera. If it's going
Right.
to be positioned as the government needs to take tighter controls on business and regulate these costs, then I think it's going to languish.
And if it's government needs to keep its hands off of free market
Exactly. Right.
mechanism, it
Right.
could just
Yeah.
languish.
Yeah. Very
But
interesting.
but this has been a contentious thing for several years now, and
Yep.
it's really interesting that it's been what 14 years since the cap's been in place,
Yeah.
and now it's been just tossed out. And I mean, even if they go to that 14.4 cents plus 4 basis points, it's still not what the merchants still aren't going to be happy.
Right. Right.
They're looking at something below 10 cents.
Right. Right.
So
Hmm.
so anyway, okay, next up, the New York Attorney General has filed a lawsuit against early warning services, alleging that the bank-owned payments company allowed fraud to flourish on its P2P network Zelle for years, resulting in consumer losses in excess of $1 billion. Now, this lawsuit pretty much mirrors a federal lawsuit brought by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau against Zelle and several of its owner banks last year, but that lawsuit lawsuit was dropped in March by the Trump administration. Of course, that didn't keep congressional Democrats from demanding information from member banks, Zelle member banks, on how they monitor and address fraud.
Right.
In a heavily redacted lawsuit, um, uh, the allegations are that Zelle, in its haste to get a bank-owned P2P network to market, dropped the ball on security, despite assurances to the contrary.
Hmm.
It further alleges that Early Warning had developed safeguards against fraud as far back as 2019, but they were never adopted until 2023.
Hmm.
It also claims that participating banks routinely failed to report frauds to the network.
Hmm.
So the Attorney General wants, These failures cost New York consumers alone hundreds of millions of dollars, according to the Attorney General. And they want Zelle to maintain, quote, basic network safeguards along with anti fraud measures, pay restitution to defrauded New York consumers, and disgorge any profits gained from the alleged fraudulent transactions.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see. I wasn't surprised to see this come up because if the feds drop something, um, you know that doesn't stop the states from doing something.
Right.
This lawsuit was filed in a state court,
Hmm.
not a federal court, so it only applies in New York. But New
Right.
York's pretty big
Yeah.
place.
Well, and a lot of that stuff, obviously, kind of the ball in this case kind of rolls uphill, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah,
So and
exactly.
a lot of times that the things that happen at these state levels, it's going to get federal. There's going to be changes made at the federal level if things are successful at the state level.
Right, exactly. And we always say, and as long as I can remember, the adage has been, "What New York and California do, eventually, the country does."
Right. Right. Yeah. There's kind of two sides of the country. They kind of end up working their way to the
Yeah,
middle.
yeah, and have the biggest banks, right?
Right.
And the
Exactly.
most consumers.
Yeah. Very
So
interesting.
yeah, yeah. So I don't know if you heard about this other one, but Fiserv and its key executives are facing a class action suit.
Oh, I heard all about this one.
Yeah, this is an interesting one. Alleging that it misled investors about the growth of Clover, its POS platform. It's being spearheaded by the City of Hollywood police officers' retirement system,
Right.
and alleges that forced conversions of merchants from Fiserv's Pay Easy platform to Clover led to artificially inflated revenue growth and gross payment volume for Clover, while hiding a slowdown in new merchant acquisitions.
Right.
Apparently, this all came to light in April of this year when Fiserv reported gross payment volume growth for Clover of just 8% for the first quarter. Quote, material step down from 2024, which saw growth of between 14 and 17%.
Right.
I reached out to Fiserv and asked them, for a comment, and they basically said they will vigorously defend themselves in the lawsuit.
Right.
But it's an interesting, I mean, one of the things that happened was that they a lot of the companies or retailers that were migrated over to Clover dropped out for less expensive competitors like Square and Toast.
Yeah.
And that's why the volume, went down,
Right.
and that's kind of where they shot themselves in the foot, I think.
Yeah, well, so to clarify for those who maybe aren't as familiar with this, so the you mentioned I think it was the police, right? The
Yeah, the police
one
officers retirement system,
retirement fund. So that fund is a major investor in Fiserv.
right?
Fiserv stock, when you look at let's say the last 6 months, in the last 6 months, their stock is down 42%.
Hmm.
So they had a high of let's see here, it was
They
about
went up
two.
for a couple years there. They went up very high. I
Right,
mean,
right.
I think they added like probably 50 or 60%.
They did. And even over the last 5 years, they're up 33% still. But what's happened is what this lawsuit is claiming is that the reason that their stock price hit, $260 at one point, I think, the reason that their stock price was so high is because they were showing this growth in Clover. Clover obviously has been hugely successful, but
Right,
they were, the claim is that they were inflating these numbers and saying, hey, they took merchants that were actually already Fiserv merchants on a different platform, moved them to Clover, and then
right.
claimed that these merchants were like new
New
merchants.
merchants.
When in fact, Fiserv already had these merchant accounts, they were just moving them over to the Clover platform, and so that's the claim. And so then what happened was, as I understand it, the volume numbers came out, and the investors were like, "Wait a minute! If you had actually added all those customers, the volume, would have grown faster."
Right,
And they started to realize, like, "Wait a minute! Something's a little bit off here." So again, Fiserv, as you said, is vigorously denying this. I mean, I read the denial. It didn't actually say that they were denying that it occurred, that they
no,
had moved
no,
these accounts.
no.
But they
That-
seem to be denying that caused material problems with the company performance, I
right.
think. So,
And that whole they basically gave me a one sentence statement that was like, you know, we disagree with, with this, and will quote vigorously defend
Right, right.
ourselves in the
You know,
lawsuit.
one thing that's interesting, Patty, that I wasn't planning to talk about today, but there's a, in my personal opinion, there is a major competitive disadvantage that Clover has right now. And again, to be fair, I think Clover is amazing. It's an incredible
Oh
success.
yeah,
You know,
incredibly successful.
congrats
Yes.
to them. I think it's fantastic. However, from a strategic perspective, right? When you look at Clover and you look at Square, so
Right.
let's take three companies: Clover, Square, and Toast. Let's look at
Okay.
those three. So Clover and Toast. Um, well, let's say Square and Toast. Square and Toast both do the payment processing,
Right.
meaning they get payment processing volume from their customers
Mm-hmm.
and they get margin. So they're able to do really creative things. They can give away their software for free. Look at Square, right?
Right.
Originally, Square wasn't much of a competitor to Clover, in my opinion, originally because frankly the feature set was awful. They just didn't have a big feature set. So it was a really good solution for a merchant where Clover would have been overkill. It was like, hey,
Mm-hmm.
just a really simple merchant. But the truth of the matter is, as much as we all might hate to admit it, um, you know, Square has a pretty nice solution now. They have some really great
They
functionality
do.
and
Yeah.
they give it away for free. Now they have some paid upgrade versions, but they're able to give away their core offering for free. Clover isn't able to do that. And it's a weird catch 22 for the ISO community because the ISOs want to make all the payments margin on Clover.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
as a result, Clover only gets their SaaS fees. But then what happens is Clover is providing the ISOs with a solution that's not truly as competitive as it could be. And then when the ISOs go to market with that solution, they understand that Clover is going to be increasing their SaaS fees, increasing their hardware fees. Like why? Because that's the only way they make money. They don't make any
Right.
money. So it's kind of interesting that Fiserv owns a software company that doesn't make any money on payments. Now they do make money on payments from, of course, their internal channel, and they've been
Right.
scaling that up more and more. But the ISOs don't really love that.
No.
That's competition. And so what's happening is, in a lot of ways, the way I think the way Fiserv would look at this is they would say, well, the ISOs are a great channel and they've done a great job of really increasing the brand awareness of Clover so that more and more business owners go and find Clover and then their inside sales team gets those sales. So
Right.
I think it's a really tricky situation to navigate for the ISOs.
Yeah.
Now, I
Yeah.
don't know. I don't think you had this as one of your news stories today. Did you have anything about Square and their ISO program?
No, I was holding that off because I just came across
You just
that
came
this
across it.
morning.
Okay, so I'll just throw it out there real quick in this context. We can talk more about it later
We'll
because
talk about it next week. Yeah.
we don't know much about it yet, right? But
Right.
Square did put out that they are having an ISO program in beta. And I actually have some interesting inside information on that I won't share here, but it is very interesting, right? And so I personally don't think the program is going to be widely competitive and work well with the ISO community, but it is interesting that they're going down that route and they're saying, hey, we can provide something to the ISOs that's actually more competitive. So I think it's a very interesting time right now. The company I own, Full Stack Payments, we're full steam ahead with a solution that's I think
Mm-hmm.
also going to be really competitive to this, and so we'll talk more about that in coming weeks. But I think it's just really an interesting time, and I think this Clover thing, the combination of like Clover's stock price dropping as a result of performance issues there, as
Right.
well as Square kind of becoming more of a direct competitor going after ISOs. It's a really interesting time, and so this is a really kind of timely news bit for ISOs to digest.
Yeah, I think it's really important to, keep on top of this, and we definitely will.
Yeah.
And so one last one, and this is not litigation. I had one that was not a litigation thing, but it was really interesting thing that I came across on CNBC. Um, JP Morgan Chase is complaining that financial technology companies that help financial apps connect with traditional checking accounts are flooding the bank systems with unnecessary data requests. Of the nearly 2 billion data requests from middlemen hitting JP Morgan systems in June, just 13% were customer initiated, according to an internal memo that was obtained by CNBC. Most of the data pulls were for purposes ranging from helping the companies improve their products or prevent fraud to harvesting data for sale to other third parties.
Yeah, so to clarify, this would be companies like Plaid, for instance, or
Right,
personal financial management software that's pulling data into their software. So it's people that are going to the bank to grab data for their own, purposes for their own fintech.
right, right. And you may recall that about a month or two ago, um, JPMorgan Chase announced that it was planning to charge fintechs for
Hmm.
accessing customer data.
Right.
And that led to all kinds of accusations that the bank was engaging in anti-competitive rent-seeking behavior. That, according to reporting by Bloomberg, at least. Now the bank says it's incurring rising costs for maintaining the infrastructure needed to handle this growing volume of data pulls. And according to the memo, the total volume of calls received by the bank has more than doubled in the past 2 years.
Mm.
Now, Plaid, which, as you just mentioned, and that's one of the biggest players out there in terms of, you
Right.
know, doing this, they said in the statement that Chase's complaint, quote, misrepresents how data access works. Because all activity begins when consumer customers grant permission to fintech companies when they sign up for accounts. Quote, calling a bank's API when a user is not present once they have authorized a connection is a standard industry practice supported by all major banks in order for consumers to get critical alerts for overdraft fees or suspicious activity, Plaid told the news outlet.
Yeah, the real question here in my mind would be, okay, if they're saying in the last 2 years the number of API calls has doubled, my question would be, what has the traffic been to their own internal dashboards and solutions? It's probably gone down by half because what they're
Mm-hmm.
saying is what Plaid is saying, and I agree with him, is that okay, we have all these customers that used to go to the bank and log in to see what their bank
Right,
balance was.
right,
Now they go into an app on their phone that's made by somebody else, and that app uses an API to get the same information. So
right,
for the bank to claim, oh, we have this huge infrastructure we have to maintain now, it's like, no, it's just that instead of customers going directly to you to get their data, they're going to third parties. And
right.
so it's coming via API call rather than a direct login. But as a general rule, a direct API call is actually going to be cleaner and require less infrastructure than a dashboard that people are using. So
Is that that I don't understand? Can and just explain that would
yeah,
you?
so think of it.
Because
So think
I
of it
don't.
this way. Yeah, so think of it this way. If I own a software company, which I own many, right? So these
Right.
software companies, it's like if somebody's going to come and they want to log into my system to see their information, then I
Mm-hmm.
have to maintain a dashboard. I have to maintain web pages. I have to maintain design of how the page is going to look. I have to maintain, all of that. If
Right.
instead they're going to go to a third party and they're going to get the information from me with an API call, then all
Okay.
I have is this little snippet of data that I have to pass directly to them, and then they have the web page,
Okay.
they
Okay.
have the design, they have the maintenance of the login, so
Right.
it's actually a much simpler
It's a
infrastructure to
simpler,
say,
yeah, and it
yeah,
saves you, right?
absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. So to me, it's like if you can, at the end of the day, the question is like, are you making less money? I would imagine that what Chase or these other companies or JP Morgan, I would imagine what they're really getting their feathers ruffled about is that probably when people log into their dashboard, that's where they see things like, hey, you should get your mortgage from us, or you should get a
Right.
home equity line.
Sure.
So I
Sure.
think it's probably more about they're not there's not actually an increase in cost. What's
Right.
happening is they're losing connection with their customer, which they
Right.
want to use to be able to increase their revenue. And I think that's probably what the fight is actually over, is all that's now going to the fintechs.
Yeah, and also, of course, the fintechs are saying, "Hey, by the way, your mortgage is, 9.5%. We can help you find something
Exactly.
a lot
Or I'll tell
cheaper,"
you, or
which
I'll tell you
is
the other one they're probably really upset about is a lot of the fintechs are saying, by the way, instead of banking with JP Morgan, you could just bank with us using our little fintech and you could get a new card. So I think
right.
it's more about a competitive concern that the banks are being commoditized, where the bank is just becoming this repository of commoditized data that third parties can
Right.
leverage. So I think it's a little disingenuous the way the bank is going about this. I think they're justified in saying we're at a competitive disadvantage and we need to do something about it. I think going at this and
Mm-hmm.
saying it's because of all these API calls that's the problem, I think that's kind of ridiculous. But I think
Right.
they have a point that, but again, I think the way you solve it is by building better technology for your customers rather than
Right.
saying, well, I'm going to stop these API calls. It's like, well, good luck with that.
Or I'm going to charge those API calls
Right,
so that I can make more money
right.
instead of having to invest more money
Right. And I mean,
in a
I
better
think that I
system.
think charging for the API calls is a valid strategy. Actually, if they could get all of the banks, they would need to get 4 or 5 of the biggest banks to do that simultaneously to them.
Right.
And they would
Right.
almost need to create their kind of like, think about what they did with like Zelle, how the banks all got together to do that.
Mm-hmm.
If those same banks got together and said, we're going to make one unified API where you can get data from any of us and we're going to charge for it. And that's the only way to get the data. That would be super interesting.
Yeah, it
But
would.
there's a lot of technical implications to that I won't get into today, but that would be pretty tricky to create actually. So
Yeah, it would be pretty. But somebody may do that. You never know.
yeah, very interesting. Well, Patty, always love all these stories you share with us. Keeps me up to date, and I think it keeps everybody else up to date as well. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and it keeps me up to date because
Yeah, you got to research all the stories.
I get to research, do all this research, and then like whittle it down to, okay, what am I going
Right,
to tell
right.
everybody this week? I have to keep up my
Yes.
moniker, the payments maven of the fourth estate.
There you go. I love it. I love it. Well, Patty, thanks so much for all you do. Hope you have a great day
Hey,
today.
hey, you too. Take care. Bye bye.